First Peter chapter 3, verse 1. Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives. And if you look at that verse, what I would propose is that this verse is all-inclusive of all wives, but there is a special word of encouragement, and that's what that phrase means, that if any. So it's not just saying that subjection and the instruction here in this text is suitable for wives with husbands that are not obeying the word, but this is suitable for all wives, but there's a certain persuasive power in what the instruction will do in and through the wife towards a husband that is not in obedience to the word. And then it goes on to say, while they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear, whose adorning, let it not be that outward adorning of plaiting of the hair and of wearing of gold or of putting on of apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, in that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. For after this manner in the old time, the holy women also who trusted in God adorned themselves, being in subjection unto their own husbands, even as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters ye are, as long as ye do well, and are not afraid with any amazement. We started this text last week, and we really did an introduction into the matter of marriage. I just would like to extract out of that a few things. But again, let's put it in its framework. We're in the practical section. Prior to chapter 2, verse 11, there was a lot of theology, and then the theology went into some basics for Christian growth, and then now is direct application. And these applications, you could say they deal with relationships. So you have relationships, and we talked about these: believers to themselves, citizens and government, employees and employers, wives and husbands, husbands and wives, believers in the church. And this is what we're looking at. We're down to this part of marriage, and it's such a key part. Some have identified marriage and the family as the central unit to any society, that it really is based on that. And there really is an important part to that as we look at this. Now, as we talk about this, I'd just like to recover, what did we say was at the center of marriage? And you have this on your notes here. What did we say was at the center of marriage? And I went away from that time, and I'm just a little concerned as I went away and reflected back. I just want to make sure that we understand that these things I said that it was not, that those things are still part of the role of a wife or part of marriage. I'm not trying to say that these elements are not there, but it's not the central point, the center of marriage. And we talked about the fact that the center of marriage is not work. It's not a slave-master relationship, but Titus 2:5 does instruct women, wives, to be what? Keepers at home. And then it also says in Proverbs 31, just listen to the amount of work of this virtuous wife. She rises when it's yet night. She gives meat to her household. The fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. She girds her loins with strength and strengthens her arms. Her candle goeth out, not out by night. She layeth her hand to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. She maketh fine linen and selleth it, and delivereth girdles unto the merchant. And she looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. This is a woman that does what? She works. And I think we need to understand this as well. Just a little bit of a note on the Titus 2 passage. And sometimes there can be such an emphasis on this matter of keepers at home that there can really be put on wives and even on husbands and wives together, undue pressure on their conscience that the wife should not, or, as far as, for believers, the wife should not work outside of the home. But if you look at that Proverbs text is talking about using her capacities to bring gain to the household, even to sell things and things of this nature. Now, we're not in that culture. If it was in that culture, that would be what that wife might be doing. We're not in that culture. In our culture, it is through gainful employment. And so really, we don't need to go too far with that application. But it's not work. Work is not the center of marriage or what the wife is there for. It's not that she's there as a one to work for her husband, but certainly a godly woman is going to, a virtuous woman, if she has the capacity, is going to give herself to work wherever that might be. And then we said it wasn't reproductive yet in Genesis 1:28. In other words, reproductive, to have children, is not the center. But obviously, because of the sexual compatibility of a man and a woman and their reproductive systems and the care that's put physically upon the mother, the capacity given there, obviously, that is God's intent. But we even find this in Genesis 1:28, and God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. So, but what I'm trying to say is, the capacity of the woman to labor, whether in the home or outside the home or both, or the capacity of the woman to, or the man, for them to be able to have children, that does not make the marriage, okay? And it's also not sexual intimacy yet. 1 Corinthians 7 talks about letting the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, likewise also the wife unto the husband. The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. And it says, defraud ye not one another. So sexual intimacy, okay, that is part of it, but it's not the center. If that's not there, you can still have a very fruitful, vibrant, deep relationship in marriage. But then what is at the center? What did we say was there? Companionship, exactly. And it was the Lord that saw this prior to even making the woman. He said, it's not good that man should be alone. That was the issue. He was without a companion. Then God says, I will make him an helpmeet, one that answers the need fitting to him. That's the idea of helpmeet, one that answers the need fitting to him. And that's what his wife that God made for him, Eve, that's what she was. And this is companionship. It's to meet the need of what? That he was alone. He was without a companion. So really these other areas, as far as capacity to work, reproductive capacity, sexual intimacy, these kinds of things might change and often do change throughout life. But companionship, that is the center to that. This is initiated and created by God. We said, ordained by God. It's God himself that said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife. They two shall be one flesh. It's superlative. It is a superlative, unique, intimate, personal relationship. It's established by mutual covenant, and it's for life. Now, what we said at the close was there's a potential problem. Okay. That's what we have in the text. The potential problem is this: a wife with a believer, a wife who is a believer and committed to following the Lord, and a spouse, a husband that is not. Now, I love it how the text says it this way. If you look at it, it describes it as that if any obey not the word. I don't know. I think every commentary that I've looked at falls down on that this is an unbeliever, okay? But the text is really pretty broad, isn't it? That obeys not the word, not in submission unto the word, unto the gospel, yes, not saved, yes. But what I would say this, from the greater to the lesser, so it is here. As much as it's true with a husband that is disobedient to the gospel, has not come to place faith in Jesus Christ, so this is true for anything less than that. Okay, so you might have a husband that's a believer, but knows, understands a spiritual truth, but is not in submission to it, but the wife is. It could be very challenging for the wife. This instruction is key, and we're going to make some applications on this. So the greatest possible conflict is here, but yet with the highest possible goal, they may be one. And that's just by review. let's go on to our caveat, which is the second point at the top of our page. The center of marriage is companionship, but what is God's intent for a potential spouse in marriage? Let me read two texts. I'm saying this here. The reason I'm saying it is because this text doesn't treat it. What it does is it treats a present situation that exists, that you have a wife that's a believer and a spouse, a husband that is an unbeliever. Okay? But that is not giving, because it's silent here, it's not giving allowance as that being acceptable in God's will. And what I mean by in God's will is, I mean by the word of God does not agree with that kind of relationship to be entered into knowingly. Let me give us two key texts. 2 Corinthians 6, 14 and 15. Listen to this. You know the text, be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. To be yoked together, to come under the same yoke together, same union together. In the latter part, it goes and expresses more, but at the latter part of verse 15, then it expresses it. What part hath he that believeth with an infidel or an unbeliever? So obviously, if this was only talking, let's say, about some coming into a partnership in business with an unbeliever, and that would be a violation of this, that is much less severe than a believer knowingly marrying an unbeliever. So this text most certainly would be applicable to that, to the matter of marriage, if it's applicable to another text or another situation. But this text is tremendous out of 1 Corinthians 7. It's talking about wives, one that's a widow. And it says this in verse 39, the wife is bound by the law as long as her husband liveth. But if her husband be dead, she is at liberty to be married to whom she will. Now, what's the rest of it say? Do you know the rest of it? Only, okay, this is the will of God, only in the Lord. Only in the Lord. So the will of God is from the expressed word of God, and it's restrictive. So what is the answer here that we have in the blank? What is God's intent for a potential spouse in marriage? And this is the way I'm going to put it. I'm not going to put down one that's saved. That's not what these blanks are. It's this. There must be spiritual harmony. Spiritual harmony. Now, I'm making that a word of what I would call pastoral counsel or personal application from these texts. And what do I mean by spiritual harmony? What's that? Not just getting along. Yeah, they need to get along. You're absolutely right about that. There should be, that's part of that companionship. But spiritual harmony, many times a man or a woman will come into a relationship with another of the opposite gender that is professing Christ, but doesn't have there's a clear distinction in their maturity spiritually, their desires spiritually, their walk with the Lord. And this can cause tremendous issues. In fact, you can get into situations like that, and we could give illustrations and examples where that was the supposed reality, that the other person was a believer, but after marriage, things change. Okay. So I really think there should be well-attested spiritual harmony in this. And it can go either way. It could be that the young lady is interested in and she's a believer and has a solid testimony, interested in a man that claims to be a believer but does not have that solid testimony, or it could be the other way around. What is blind? What do they say is blind? Love is blind, right? And it's blind on this point. And often what happens is even a strong believer can just kind of check off the box. Okay, I check off 2 Corinthians 6 and 1 Corinthians 7. This person is claiming to be a believer, yet there's some real question there about that person's walk with the Lord. And if there's a question about the walk with the Lord, there's a question about what? The reality of that profession of faith. Okay, we shouldn't just, we've looked at this enough together where we know if there's a question about their walk with the Lord, then we have a concern about the reality of their faith, period. We don't need to just accept, well, at these many years ago when I was this age, I did, but there's no reality of that in their life. Christ is not evidenced as being in them. There should be a concern. So this is just a caveat on that. And now let's get to this point. How can a wife glorify God in her marriage? Now we're going to look at the text. 3 simple points. First of all, by what? By submission. And we talked about submission. It has the idea of arranging oneself underneath. Let's ask a question about this. Does this mean that the wife is inferior? Absolutely not. I think that the men here could give testimony to the fact that they understand that their wives are not in any respect inferior. In fact, their wives, usually there's often a balance where the wife will be superior in certain areas, certain giftedness, certain capacity, and the man will be superior in certain areas in giftedness and capacity. There often is a balance there. And when you get to other areas that aren't so substantial, there are often balances in personality and things like this. But there's not an inferiority. That is not the idea here. And we know that because Christ himself in Luke 2:51 did this to his parents. He arranged himself underneath his parents. And obviously he was what? Without doubt, he was superior to his parents. So we don't need to consider it that way. Let me ask a question just by way of application. When is submission by the wife most evident? When is submission by the wife most evident? Now, you might come up with a different answer than me, and that's okay. When is her submission? Now, in this text, it's submission to what? It's submission to his position of headship in that relationship. So it's a position of authority. So when is her submission most clear, most evident? Well, how about this? During points of disagreement, right? Isn't that the hard time? I mean, if the husband and wife are going down the same track together, and they both agree on everything, is there any understanding whether or not the wife is submitted to her husband? She may or may not be, right? They're on the same track. They're on the same train. It's when he wants to take the train this way, and she thinks they ought to take the train this way. There's disagreement. Okay. Now, the question is, in this text or in other situations, what is really a point where submission comes in? Does that mean that the wife can't even say anything? Can't even clarify? I don't think that's the case at all. I think the case is, if you look in the text, okay, submission is a general position that she takes underneath the headship of her husband. It is most evident when there's disagreement, and it's clearest when what? When the husband fully knows, fully understands, and with that knowledge and understanding has taken a firm position, unwilling to change. That is the clearest time that this kind of application would come into play as far as with a husband who does not obey the word. We're going to be treating that. But have you ever, second point here, when is submission most clearly evident, not only during points of disagreement, but when it comes from the heart, right? And I like to put it this way so that we can understand it, so the ladies can understand it. We know that husbands are supposed to love their wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. Wives, do you know when your husband is loving to you, but does acts of love, says words of love? Let me put it this way, would you be able to sense if it wasn't from his heart? And once you sense it, how would you appreciate that? Would you appreciate words of love if it's not from his heart? No. And vice versa. Your husband doesn't want to hear words of love and acts of love if it's not from your heart. Same thing with submission. Okay, it's something from the heart. Now, you could put it this way, like, when this happens in other arrangements, but well, fine, we'll just do it your way. Well, that's obviously putting a big exclamation point that you wholly disagree. And yes, you might be doing it, but you're doing it with a resisting spirit. You see what I'm saying? And none of us would want to be loved that way either. And so there is something here about this to really manifest this submission in the right kind of way at points where it really does test itself. Secondly, by submission, and then secondly, by word. A wife can glorify God in her marriage by submitting, arranging herself underneath the headship and authority of her husband. And also she can glorify God in marriage by word. Now, you tell me, if you look at it, what describes here the word, what comes out of her mouth? What describes the word of the wife in the text? Can you see that? What she says? It's in verse 1. What does she say in verse 1? Yeah, she says nothing. You might say, Pastor Eric, are you trying to say we can't speak to our husbands about things? No, I'm not saying that at all. But in the context again, okay, I believe if it's describing him as somebody who obeys not the word, that means that there is understanding, there's first knowledge of the word, understanding of that word, and there is resistance in his will to that word. You see those three things? That's there. And once that's been established, then there is without the word. Okay. That's what I'm proposing that the text is pointing us to. Is what I would point to this way is that a godly wife knows when and when not to speak, when and when not to say something. In fact, you can go back and find examples and also exhortation regarding what we should say, and that there is a timing to when we say it, and there's a spirit in which it should be said. And the wife that glorifies God with her words in that marriage knows when to use them. And there is a time where she is going to refrain from speaking, and it's going to be with incredible power in persuading her husband. Now, let's just ask a question. Have you ever taken a position against someone else, a spouse or child or another person that you know, and you've tried to explain to them so they know, they understand, and they are defiant against it? How helpful has it been for you just to come back and just keep saying the same thing to them? How helpful is that? What happens after a while? They don't want to see you. They don't want to, they turn it entirely off. It's like a clanging cymbal. It just becomes what was being said and what needed to be persuaded, what they need to be persuaded of possibly could have worked, but you just had to keep saying it. And there's a tendency, I'm not talking to women here, I'm talking to all of us here. We all have that tendency to want to do that. We all do. And there comes a point where if that person clearly knows your position, so they have knowledge, they have understanding, and they have postured themselves in rejection of that, okay, there's something more that can be done besides clanging the cymbal or beating the drum. And so if anything, that can actually close off the relationship and not give you opportunity. And so the godly wife knows when to speak, how to speak, and it really comes to this. She even knows when to entirely refrain from speaking. And she does it believing that God's at work and that without words, there is still an incredible gospel power, an incredible grace of God that can work through her in her husband. Okay, that's what the text is pointing to. So lastly, it's by conduct. Let's go down through this. Conduct here, or conversation, or lifestyle. Let's look at 3 points in the text. First of all, blameless conduct. It says chaste conversation. Chaste isn't a word we use too much. Purity of conduct, or it means free from fault in every area of life. This does not mean perfection, okay? But it does mean that the wife doesn't conduct herself in such a way that she's guilty in front of her husband for the way that she's responding and conducting herself in the home and in their relationship. There's a chaste, a pure, free from fault, blameless conduct. And then secondly, there's respectful attitude. It says with fear. This is not talking about the fear of God. This is talking about with respect. In fact, another translation puts it this way: as they, that is, as the disobedient husband or the unbelieving husband, observe your chaste and respectful behavior. That there is respect given, there is worth and value given to the husband, even if he is not worthy in the sense of his character or his conduct. He's worthy in what sense? He's worthy in the sense of his position, okay, as husband. And then thirdly, and this is really the key, beautiful spirit, a beautiful spirit. And it talks about their adorning. This is actually talking about what they're going to be wearing. And it's not talking against these things. It's not talking about the problem with physical beauty. It's not talking about not looking nice. It's not talking about that, but it's making a contrast and saying what's going to win the day, what's going to win your husband. Do those things, take care of yourself, but what's going to win is this, 2 things. It's going to be a meek spirit and a quiet spirit. And you see here, the source is from the heart. It's that which is not corruptible. In other words, it isn't falling to decay. What happens for all of us as we get older? I just have been looking at pictures of some of you. I looked at pictures of some of you from the 45th anniversary. I looked at pictures of some of you from the 30th anniversary. Okay. Just today, Jackie sent us a picture from 20 plus years ago from our deputation. Okay. There are things that, I don't look as young as I used to. Okay. And that's true for all of us. I could tell stories about my wife. It was terrible. We were in I might have told this to you before, but I've been mistaken for my wife's, not only her dad, right? Am I right on this? But also your grandfather. Is that correct? Yes, there's the picture. There's witness. Back then, there was closer proximity. Okay, so, but a meek spirit, gentle and considerate, unassuming, a quiet spirit, tranquility rising from within. And the encouragement in this text is incredible. And this is where I say this is really broad, because it goes all the way back to say this is how the godly women of old were. They were holy women. They trusted in God. That needs to be the center of a woman, a believer, especially one who has the conflict, a disharmony within the marriage. They adorn themselves in this way, and they bring themselves in submission to their husbands. Sarah, the example here is where she calls her husband Lord. You know the fantastic thing about that? This isn't trying to encourage wives of this day to call your husbands Lord or Master. You don't need to do that, okay? That's not the idea there. Okay, that was within their cultural context. But it's that she did it in her heart. It was a heart matter. Within the text, it is from her heart. It says that she laughed within herself saying these things. Let me just close with this. Testimony of Monica, AD 331 to 387. She was the mother of Augustine. You might know Augustine. Just listen to this testimony and we'll close. When she had married at a marriageable age, she was given to a husband whom she served as her Lord. And she bruised her, that's not what it says. She busied herself to gain him to thee, preaching thee unto him by her behavior, by which thou madest her fair and reverently amiable and admirable unto her husband. For she so bore the wronging of her bed as never to have any dissension with her husband on account of it. For she waited for thy mercy upon him, that by believing in thee he might become chaste or holy. It goes on that he was a fierce man, and that was even a testimony of those outside of their marriage, that they observed that he was very fierce to her. But then it goes on to say, when they, knowing what a furious husband she endured, marveled that it had never been reported, or that there had been any domestic strife between them, even for a day. Finally, her own husband, now towards the end of his earthly existence, did she gain over unto thee. And this has been true from prior to Christ, in the beginning of the church, and to this day. This is how God is glorified through a believing wife. And it is a work of the Spirit of God. It is the manifestations of the excellencies of God, back earlier in chapter 2, within the most intimate of relationships. And it's so brilliant and bright, it has the power to convert an unbelieving husband. It's incredible. But what an encouragement. Let's pray. Father, we do thank you for your grace. We pray that you would bless the night we